Today my guest is Joel Dart. Joel, how are you?
Doing very well.
Joel, what do you do?
I'm a software developer for a company called Dino. We do education software, creating collaborative tools for teachers to do collaborative note-taking and classroom management software, and just a lot of different tools built up into this generally usable suite.
Oh, very cool. Let's talk today about reactive extensions.
Okay.
That's a new thing from Microsoft. Tell me about it. What is it?
Basically, reactive extensions is a collection of extension methods designed to make asynchronous programming a bit easier. And the way they do this is by making events first-class citizens in the C# language. So what I mean by first-class citizens, you have different classes, such as a string. Mm-hmm. A string you can combine...
So a string is an example of first-class citizen.
Exactly. A string you can combine with another string, you can concatenate two strings together, you can do lots of different methods on it, you can add a string to a collection of strings, and then...
You can call toString.
Exactly.
String.
There's so many things you can do with a string. With events, you can subscribe to them and unsubscribe and trigger them, but there's not really very much... It doesn't act in the same way. It doesn't have the same status as other classes in .NET.
We're kind of neglecting the events.
Exactly.
So it's time to change that. The reactive extensions adds more power to these events, or what does it do?
So basically, it's a series of extension methods, and it allows you to conceive an event stream as a collection of events. So, for instance, a button. A button has a click event. Well, that makes sense in some cases, but what if you wanted to think of it as a button as a collection of click events?
Okay.
And so when you think of it in those terms, then suddenly you have access to all the collection operators that are provided through the link extensions. And as we all know, link is a very powerful set of extensions that lets you combine and join and group and all sorts of of operators you can do on static collections such as lists and arrays, etc., etc. But when you start thinking of events as collections, then you can start thinking, okay, well, over here I was able to combine and do cool things with lists, so maybe I can do cool things with collections of events. And so that's where you start composing together events and really start to gain some of the power that you can in asynchronous programming and regain a little bit of the mindset that you need for that.
Okay, let me get my head around this a little bit, because I've worked with Link in terms of data, maybe querying a database, maybe working with objects, maybe working with XML, and it always struck me as a shortcut for doing the things that you talked about, selecting, aggregating, maybe sorting the data from those collections of objects or database rows or whatever. Things that I could do in code, in procedural code, but it was more elegant, it was quicker, it was easier to read and therefore easier to maintain. Is that the same thing true with these extension methods and reactive extensions? Yeah,
in a lot of ways, so for example, the hello world of reactive extensions that's demonstrated on forums and blog posts, etc., is drag and drop.
Okay.
So drag and drop's a situation, and when you're creating a drag and drop implementation, you have three events that you have to handle. There's a button down, and then a button or a mouse, or sorry, not button down, mouse down, mouse move, and mouse up.
Okay.
So if you're doing an implementation, you might have a global flag where you, on the mouse down event, you set your global flag. Then in the mouse move event, you would check that global flag, and if the global flag is set, you would find out what the current mouse position is, and the last mouse position. You would do a delta of the two and offset your object that you're dragging for that. And then in the mouse up event, you would reset that global flag that you were using.
All right, so you got to track three events, and you got to track a global flag to know whether or not that mouse is down or up.
Right.
That's quite a bit of code.
Right, and what you can do with reactive extensions is you can compose together those three event streams, those collection of mouse down, mouse move, and mouse up events, and by thinking of them as collections, you can use link operators and compose those together into a single new event, if you want to think of it like that.
Okay.
And suddenly your business logic is when there's a drag event, which is the new event that I've created, I move my rectangle. And so the code that's really important, the essence of the code is preserved in a very terse and readable form, and a lot of the ceremony is behind the scenes, and you're able to just be more productive in that sense. And it's much more readable. You don't have global flags all over the place, and as you add on new operators, if you need a selection box to show up, then you don't have to add another global flag to know whether you're dragging or selecting. And as you add on those different types of things, it can become a big mess. But with Link, and by creating these observable collections, it's a lot of your code can be just composed into new events and those types of things.
Okay, so it sounds like the power of this thing is really becomes apparent the more complex your event model is. If you have multiple events that are dependent upon one another, that's
Absolutely.
what really becomes. If you just have a click event, does it buy you anything for that?
Well, on the whole, you're not going to see a lot of advantages going through reactive extensions if all you're doing is in the beginning of your user interface assigning all your events, and
right.
You never unsubscribe them, or there's no kind of interactivity with it. If you're just clicking through a wizard, for instance, there's no reason that there's not much advantage in that.
Okay.
There are some situations, say that if you're using lambdas and you're assigning a lambda to a click event, then because of the syntax for subscribing and unsubscribing to events, you can't really unsubscribe from that because you created an instance function for that, and so there's kind of an identity crisis in there when you're trying to remove.
You didn't save a pointer to that.
Exactly. Reactive extensions, one of the things that it does is when you subscribe to it, it returns a disposable object, and you're able to dispose of the reference to this subscription, and so that kind of works around this lambda problem if you're needing to subscribe and unsubscribe dynamically using lambda expressions.
Okay, well, walk me through as a developer if I want to use reactive extensions. First of all, is this ship with Visual Studio, or is this something to download?
What you need to go to is in the Microsoft Dev Labs. If they've got a section for reactive extensions, and there are several different versions of it based on what product you're wanting to use it. For instance, Silverlight 3 and Silverlight 4, there's a version of reactive extension that you can download.
Okay.
And it works against .NET 3.5, .NET 4, Silverlight 3, 4, and there's even a reactive extensions for JavaScript.
Okay.
And basically you download the installer. It will install by default to cloud programmability, and it tells you on just clicking through the MSI.
Okay.
But then you've got those DLLs on your machine.
All right.
At that point in Visual Studio, you would need to add the references
to those DLLs.
To those DLLs, and then you're able to use them.
Okay, and then then in your classes or in your code behind, you're going to have some using statements for the namespaces of those DLLs, and that's where those extension methods are.
Right.
In those DLLs. Okay. Tell me, where is this? You mentioned Silverlight. Is this just for Silverlight, or is this for web programming, for web forms and for Win forms?
So the reactive extensions, there's a specific version built for Silverlight, since Silverlight's a kind of a special version of .NET. But it also just ships with regular .NET, so you can do drag and drop in your Win forms app if you're needing to create one of those. If you're needing to do WPF, it works there.
Okay.
And
for web forms, if you're doing client side drag and drop, things like that, you would use the JavaScript one.
Right. Or if you're needing on the server, say you're wanting to do asynchronous, if you're wanting to read up a file asynchronously, or make calls to the database asynchronously, and you need to coordinate some of these interactions. That's another case where reactive extensions can come in. In fact, Jeff Van Gogh on his blog is currently going through a series of reactive extensions on the server.
Okay. As I'm building these event-driven applications, is there something in my application that will tell me what, will be a flag to me that say this is a place where reactive extensions would be appropriate, as opposed to just the old classic way of binding events? At what point what code am I seeing, what patterns am I seeing in my code when I start to think, reactive extensions are appropriate for this problem?
I think basically the place where reactive extensions really gives you power is when you have multiple events, whether they are UI events such as a text change or dealing with server calls. So say you're making server calls based on a text changed event, and you're needing to coordinate all of these calls, or if you've got a problem where you've got several events that are happening concurrently, you need to coordinate those and react and do something after all of them are done, or ensure that they're done in a certain order, and those types of things. Any place where you've got several events going on and you need to coordinate them, that's where being able to compose those event streams into observable collections really helps you regain some of that control. Okay.
And where's a good place for people who aren't familiar with this technology, which I assume is most of us,
right,
to learn about this?
There's some great places. Matthew Padosaki, he's got a great blog for reactive extensions for JavaScript. He's been going through a lot of examples on how to integrate with different frameworks. And just the reactive extensions forums is an amazing resource. The reactive extension member team is actively checking up on there and making sure that everyone knows what's going on. And it's really fast to get an answer back. And there are typically different ways that people are showing you how you can do it. You can do it this way with these advantages, this way with the others. It's a great resource to check out there. And every day now, if on Twitter, there's an RxNet hashtag. Rx typically goes to illegal prescription drugs sometimes, but the RxNet and RxJS hashtags, you'll see. Every couple of days, someone new will have a blog post describing an interesting way that they're using reactive extensions. So those are all great resources to check out. And for reactive extensions, just in general, there's a 101 samples of reactive extensions on the website. I think it's linked to from the Dev Labs. If not, if you just use your favorite search engine for reactive extensions.
Yeah. Okay, we'll put a link to it here. And are you blogging?
I am not blogging, but I tweet out.
What's your handle?
My handle is @JoelDart. As I find interesting articles, I try and reshare those every once in a while.
Okay. Anything else you want to add?
Right. I think the reactive extensions are really great. If you have time, check out Eric Meyer's talk on reactive extensions for JavaScript. He does a great job. The reactive extensions for JavaScript from Mix 2010.
Okay.
He does a great job explaining what reactive extensions does, and especially going into some of the mathematical duality between push-based and pull-based collections. It's really a neat concept. If you're into geeking out over code, then that's something to check out.
I'll check it out. We'll put a link to that as well. All right, Joel. Thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
No problem. I find that without technology, I would have no friends.